Some nights it isn't that your thoughts are loud, it's that the world itself doesn't seem ready to rest, even after the lights are off, even after the day is officially over, something continues to move. Not noise, not urgency, but a quiet activity that lingers beneath the surface. The world keeps presenting itself, asking to be understood, to be explained, to be placed somewhere meaningful, why things happened the way they did, what they were leading toward, what they say about you, about others, about what comes next. The mind doesn't feel frantic on nights like this. It feels occupied, as if it's still holding the world upright, keeping everything arranged, making sure nothing collapses into confusion. There's a subtle sense of responsibility in it, a feeling that rest can come later, once everything makes sense, once the edges are defined, once the questions are settled, or at least properly framed. This sleep story is for nights like that, nights when you're not overwhelmed, not emotionally flooded, not anxious in any obvious way, just quietly engaged, still participating, still involved, as if the world hasn't quite let go of you yet. Sometimes the world feels restless, not because it's unstable, but because it's too stable, too defined, too well outlined. Everything stands clearly in place, asking to be acknowledged. Facts, explanations, roles, expectations. Even rest can begin to feel structured, as if there is a correct way to do it, a correct understanding to arrive at before you're allowed to relax. You may notice that even in silence, the mind keeps orienting itself, locating, naming, interpreting. This isn't a mistake. It's a habit that has been learned over a lifetime, a habit built from trying to feel safe, coherent, and connected in a complex world. Understanding has been a way to rest. Explaining has been a way to settle. But at night, that habit can grow tired. The effort to understand may no longer soothe. It may simply continue, repeating itself quietly, turning the same shapes over and over, not because they are urgent, but because they are familiar. If you notice that tonight there is nothing wrong with you, it doesn't mean you're thinking too much. It doesn't mean you're failing to relax. It simply means that the world has been active for a long time. And you've been attending to it carefully. Here, nothing needs to be solved. Nothing needs to be resolved or clarified. You don't need to organize your thoughts. You don't need to reach the end of any idea. You don't need to understand what this story is pointing toward. You don't even need to listen closely. This is not a night for answers, and it's not a night for better questions. It's a night where questioning itself can rest. For a long time, humans have trusted understanding, trusted explanation, trusted the idea that if something can be named clearly enough, it can finally settle, and often that works. But there are moments, especially late at night, when understanding no longer brings ease, when clarity feels effortful, when even curiosity begins to feel like weight. On those nights, rest doesn't come from knowing more. It comes from holding less, from loosening the grip that keeps the world firmly in place, not by force, not by intention, just by allowing the movement of understanding to pause. You don't need to make that happen. You don't need to change your thinking. There is nothing to practice here, nothing to apply, just a gradual permission for the world to stop asking something of you. As you listen, you may notice the sense that something needs to be done, something needs to be completed. If that feeling is there, let it be there. You don't have to remove it. You don't have to follow it. You can let it stand quietly without answering. This story isn't here to add meaning to the world. It isn't here to explain how things work. It's here to let meaning rest, to let explanation step aside, to let the world remain without being handled. Imagine for a moment what it would be like if nothing required your interpretation, if the world could simply exist without needing to be placed into order, without needing to be understood correctly, without needing to point anywhere at all. You don't have to imagine it clearly. You don't have to hold the image. Just allow the suggestion to pass through lightly. As the world begins to slow, you don't need to follow it. You don't need to track the change. You can let the sense of involvement soften on its own, as if the world, for once, doesn't need to be held together, as if it can rest without explanation, and as the world begins to rest, you can rest with it. For a long time, science has been one of the ways humans learn to feel steady in the world, by observing carefully, by measuring precisely, by explaining how things behave and why they appear the way they do. Each explanation offered a sense of ground, a feeling that the world could be trusted because it could be understood. And for a while that worked remarkably well. The more we learned, the more stable the world seemed. Patterns emerged, laws formed, causes and effects lined up neatly. The universe began to look like something that could be mapped, predicted, and held in the mind without slipping away. But as science continued, something subtle began to change. Not a failure and not a mistake, simply a slowing. At the edges of its own success, science started to notice its limits. The closer observation became, the less clear the separation between observer and observed appeared to be. The act of measuring no longer felt neutral. Watching something began to affect what was being seen. This wasn't a problem to solve. It was a realization to sit with. At the smallest scales, certainty softened. At the largest scales, the same thing happened. Space and time refused to stay fixed. Matter behaved less like solid objects and more like shifting relationships. The clearer the equations became, the quieter their meaning felt. Science did not arrive at confusion. It arrived at humility, not the kind that admits defeat, but the kind that recognizes a boundary, a place where explanation no longer adds comfort, a place where understanding no longer brings rest. At this edge, science does something very gentle. It slows down. It becomes careful. It stops insisting that everything must be fully explained in order to exist. Instead of pushing forward, it pauses. For the human mind, this pause can feel unfamiliar. We are used to progress, used to answers leading to more answers, used to the sense that clarity will eventually arrive if we keep looking closely enough. But here, looking more closely doesn't bring resolution. It brings quiet. And that quiet isn't empty. It's simply free of demand. No theory is asking to be finished. No explanation is waiting to be completed. There is just the recognition that the world is not something that can be fully held, not because it is broken or chaotic, but because it is deeper than the structures we use to describe it. In this moment, science does not tell us what to believe. It doesn't offer a final picture of reality. It only shows us where certainty naturally comes to rest. And in doing so, it opens a small space, a space where the mind does not have to keep working, where the world does not need to be kept in order through effort. That space is quiet, and it is enough. When science reaches this quiet edge, something important happens, not a conclusion and not a solution, just a change in posture. The drive to explain relaxes, the urgency to define loosens. What remains is not uncertainty, but a kind of openness, a recognition that the world does not require complete explanation in order to be real. For the mind, this can feel surprisingly relieving, because so much effort has gone into holding the world together through understanding, making sure every part fits, making sure nothing is left without a place. When explanation pauses, that effort can pause too. This does not mean that knowledge disappears. Everything science has discovered remains intact. Nothing is undone, but the pressure to finish the picture fades. The need to arrive at a final understanding quietly steps aside. At this point, science does something rare. It stops asking more of the world. It allows what is observed to remain partially unknown. Not as a failure, but as a natural condition. This moment is important because it reveals something about the human experience. Much of our restlessness does not come from a lack of answers. It comes from the ongoing movement of explanation itself, the sense that something still needs to be figured out before we are allowed to rest. When explanation pauses, that permission quietly arrives, not announced, not emphasized, just present. This is where another perspective begins to feel familiar, one that has never tried to complete the picture in the first place, one that does not treat the world as a problem to be solved or a structure to be fully understood. Rather than offering new explanations, this perspective notices something simpler, that the effort to understand is an activity, and like any activity, it can stop, not because it is wrong, but because it is no longer needed. When explanation rests, the world does not collapse. Nothing becomes unstable. The world continues exactly as it is. The only thing that changes is the demand placed upon it. In this quiet space, there is nothing to pursue, nothing to finish, nothing to hold together. The mind does not have to move forward or backward or anywhere at all. This is not the end of understanding. It is simply the place where understanding takes a breath, and in that pause, the world is allowed to be what it is without asking anything from you. When explanations slow down, it can feel unfamiliar at first. The mind has spent a long time moving toward clarity, toward answers, toward understanding as a way to feel steady. So when that movement pauses, something else becomes visible, not the answers we were looking for, but the place where the questions themselves begin. Questions often feel as if they come from the world, from events, from uncertainty, from things that don't behave the way we expect. But if you look gently, you may notice something quieter underneath. Questions don't arise simply because the world is unclear. They arise because the mind is trying to feel settled. To ask a question is to reach for ground, to look for something solid enough to stand on, a reason, a meaning, a structure that says, this makes sense, and because it makes sense, I can rest. Questions are not signs of failure. They are signs of care, signs of a mind that wants stability, safety, and coherence. Over time, This reaching becomes very familiar, almost automatic. The moment something feels uncertain, a question appears. What does this mean? Why did this happen? What should I understand from this? The question arrives before we even notice it forming. This is not a mistake. It is simply how the mind has learned to orient itself in a complex world, by asking, by naming, by placing experience into categories that feel manageable. Questions become a way of holding the world still long enough to breathe. But at night, this habit can become visible in a different way. When there is nothing urgent to solve, questions can continue anyway, moving on their own, asking without expecting an answer, turning gently but endlessly. In those moments, the issue is not that the questions are unanswered. It's that the asking itself has not rested. The movement continues, even when there is nowhere it needs to go. This perspective does not ask you to stop questioning. It doesn't suggest that questions are wrong or unnecessary. It simply notices that questioning is an activity, and like any activity, it has a rhythm, a beginning, a middle, and a natural point of rest. You may begin to sense that rest does not come from finding the right answer. It comes from noticing when the need to ask has softened, when the mind no longer needs to lean forward into explanation. This is not something you have to create. You don't need to decide to stop asking. The softening happens on its own when the effort behind the questions is finally seen. And as that effort becomes visible, it begins to loosen. Not all at once, just enough for the questions to slow, just enough for the space beneath them to be felt. As the movement of questioning becomes easier to notice, something else may appear alongside it, a quiet sense of fatigue, not mental exhaustion in the usual sense, but a gentler tiredness, the tiredness of having reached forward for a long time. Questions do not usually stop because they are answered. They stop when the need behind them softens, when the sense of having to arrive somewhere finally relaxes. This doesn't happen through effort. It happens through recognition. When the mind sees that it has been asking in order to feel settled, something shifts. The urgency fades. The questions lose their sharpness. They become quieter, less insistent. Some may still appear, but they no longer demand a response. In this way, questioning begins to resemble breathing. It arises, it moves, and then it naturally rests. There is no need to hold it open, no need to close it deliberately. The rhythm takes care of itself. From this perspective, the world has not become clearer or more confusing. It has simply stopped being something that needs to be managed through thought. Events continue, sensations continue, but the impulse to frame them into meaning loosens. This is not indifference, and it is not withdrawal. It is a kind of trust, a trust that experience does not need constant interpretation in order to be safe. When this trust is present, even briefly, the mind rests in a different way. It no longer leans forward into the next question. It no longer reaches for explanation as a form of support. It settles into what is already here. There is nothing dramatic in this moment, nothing to notice or remember. It is quiet and easily missed, and yet it is deeply familiar, a resting that does not depend on understanding. As questioning softens, the world does not disappear. It simply becomes less demanding, less insistent, less in need of your attention, and in that easing, the world begins to rest, not because it has been solved, but because it is no longer being asked to be. There is a quiet effort that often goes unnoticed, an effort so familiar that it feels like part of the world itself, the effort of understanding, of making sense, of keeping experience arranged in a way that feels stable. Understanding is usually seen as something gentle, something helpful, and often it is. It helps us move through the world. It gives shape to what we experience. It allows us to communicate, to plan, to feel oriented. But like any effort, it has a cost, and that cost becomes more noticeable when the world grows quiet. At night, when there is less to respond to, the effort of understanding can feel heavier, not because it increases, but because there is nothing else to carry it. The mind continues to interpret, to frame, to explain, even when there is no clear reason to do so. This effort is subtle. It doesn't feel like strain. It feels like responsibility, as if the world depends on being understood correctly, as if things might lose their place if attention relaxes, as if rest must wait until meaning is secured. Over time, understanding becomes more than a tool. It becomes a posture, a way of holding the world steady through thought. Experiences are not allowed to simply pass. They are caught, examined, positioned, given context, given significance. This posture is not wrong. It developed for good reasons. It helped create safety, continuity, a sense of self moving through time. But when the posture never releases, even briefly, it becomes tiring, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, cumulative way. You may notice this as a feeling that rest is conditional, that you can rest once you understand what something meant. Once you place an experience in the right category, once you know how it fits into the larger picture of your life. At night, that picture can feel very large. The mind may reach not only for today, but for patterns, for stories, for coherence across time, and all of that requires effort, continuous, gentle effort that rarely announces itself. This section of the story isn't here to undo understanding. It isn't asking you to stop thinking or to reject meaning. It is only here to make the effort visible, to let you notice how much is being held. You don't need to change anything you notice. There is no need to drop the effort intentionally. Simply seeing it is enough. When effort is seen clearly, it begins to soften on its own. As you listen, you may sense moments where the mind leans forward slightly, reaching to grasp what is being said, trying to connect it to something else. If that happens, you don't need to follow it. You can let the movement begin and end without completing it. Understanding does not need to disappear for rest to arrive. It only needs to loosen its grip, just enough for the weight it carries to be set down even briefly, and as that weight eases, you may notice a different kind of quiet, one that does not come from clarity but from release, a quiet that does not depend on knowing where everything belongs. When understanding begins to loosen, it doesn't fall away all at once. It simply stops being held up, like something that has been supported for a long time and is finally allowed to rest on its own. There is no collapse, no sudden emptiness, just a gentle release of effort. Much of the strain of understanding comes not from the ideas themselves, but from the need to keep them in place, to make sure they continue to explain, to make sure they remain useful, to make sure they justify what is happening now or what has already happened. This quiet maintenance can go unnoticed for years. You may notice how often the mind returns to the same understandings, revisiting them, adjusting them slightly, making sure they still hold. This repetition is not obsession, it is care. The care of a mind that has learned to stay alert by staying informed. But there comes a moment when even well-crafted explanations begin to feel heavy. Not because they are incorrect, but because they are no longer needed. Like instructions that have already been learned. Like a map that has already brought you here. At that point, rest does not come from adding something new. It comes from allowing what is already present to stand without support, to exist without being interpreted again, to be without being checked. You may notice a subtle fear here, a feeling that if understanding is not actively maintained, something might slip, something might be lost, something might become unclear in a way that matters. If that feeling appears, let it appear. It does not need to be resolved. It is simply part of the transition from effort to rest. Nothing important is at risk. Experience continues. Awareness continues. The world remains intact. The only thing that changes is the posture of holding. As this posture softens, there may be moments where meaning fades slightly into the background, not disappearing, just becoming less central, less urgent, less demanding, like sound heard from a distance rather than directly in front of you. In those moments, you don't need to focus on anything in particular. You don't need to stabilize the experience. You can let it be as it is without checking whether it makes sense. Rest begins here, not because everything has been understood, but because understanding no longer needs to be carried. The mind is no longer standing guard over meaning. It is free to settle into what is already here. There is no instruction to follow in this, no conclusion to arrive at, just a gradual easing. A sense that the world does not require your constant attention in order to exist. And as that realization settles, gently and without emphasis, the effort of understanding continues to loosen. Not through intention, but through permission. Permission for things to remain exactly as they are without being held in place. There are moments when questions do not disappear, but they stop pulling at you. They are still present, still recognizable as questions, but they no longer demand movement. They no longer lean forward. They no longer insist that something must happen next. At first, this can feel unfamiliar. The mind is used to questions as signals, as prompts that require attention, as openings that lead somewhere else. A question appears, and the body subtly prepares to follow it, to think further, to reach, to complete the motion. But sometimes that motion grows quiet, not because the question has been answered, but because the need behind it has softened. The question appears, and then it simply stays where it is. It does not open into another thought. It does not ask for resolution. It rests. This change is not dramatic. It does not feel like silence arriving all at once. It feels more like weight easing, like something that has been held lightly for a long time and is now being set down without effort. You may notice that questions begin to pass through more slowly. They arise, hover briefly, and then fade without being carried forward. The mind does not grab them. It does not build around them. It does not turn them into tasks. This is not something you make happen. It is not a technique, and it is not a result of doing something correctly. It happens naturally when the posture of inquiry relaxes, when the mind no longer feels the need to lean into the next explanation. Often this relaxation comes from fatigue, not exhaustion, but completion, the kind of tiredness that comes when something has been done enough. Enough asking, enough framing, enough trying to arrive somewhere through thought. In this state, experience feels wider. Thoughts still arise, but they are no longer immediately tied to meaning. Sensations still appear, but they are not translated into stories. The world feels present without commentary. At times, the mind may hesitate here. It may wonder whether something important is being overlooked, whether attention has become too loose. If that hesitation appears, let it appear. It does not need to be answered. It is simply another movement that can rest. Nothing is being lost. The ability to question remains untouched. It has not disappeared. It is simply quiet, the way a conversation quiets when no one feels the need to speak. In that quiet, there is a gentle relief, not because anything has been resolved, but because nothing is being required. Experience is allowed to arrive and pass without being turned into a question that needs to go somewhere. As this easing continues, the world begins to feel less demanding, less expectant, as if it no longer requires your response in order to remain, as if it can simply be here without being addressed. And in that moment, questioning does not stop, it rests, and that rest begins to spread softly through everything that follows. As questions loosen, they leave something behind, not emptiness and not silence in the ordinary sense, but space, a space that was always there, now uncovered, the space where questions used to move, where they used to lean forward, where they used to ask for the next step. At first, this space may feel uncertain. The mind is accustomed to movement, to the sense that something is happening internally. When that movement pauses, there can be a brief moment of disorientation, not confusion, just unfamiliarity. This space does not need to be filled. It does not require attention. It is not asking for interpretation. It simply remains open and neutral, without direction. Within this openness, experience changes its texture. Thoughts still appear, but they feel lighter. They arrive without urgency, and they leave without leaving a trace. Sensations come and go without being labeled or evaluated. You may notice that the mind no longer reaches to connect one experience to another. There is less linking, less assembling. Moments are allowed to stand on their own without being arranged into a sequence. This can feel restful in a way that is difficult to describe. Not the rest that comes from understanding, and not the rest that comes from resolution. A rest that comes from not needing to carry anything forward. There is nothing to do in this space, no role to play, no task to complete. Even the sense of being someone who is resting can soften here. If the mind notices this openness and tries to hold on to it, that too can be allowed to pass. There is no need to maintain the space. It maintains itself when nothing interferes. This openness is not fragile. It does not depend on effort. It does not disappear when thoughts return. Thoughts can pass through it freely without disturbing it. As this becomes clearer, there may be a sense that the world is no longer arranged around you. Experiences no longer line up to be understood or responded to. They simply appear and dissolve in their own time. In this way, the space left behind by questions becomes a place of quiet stability, not fixed, not defined, but steady in its own gentle way, a place where nothing needs to be explained and nothing needs to be held together. And as this space continues to open, the world begins to feel less like something that needs your attention and more like something that can rest alongside you. As the space left by questions settles, the relationship with the world begins to change, not dramatically and not all at once. The world does not look different. It does not behave differently. What changes is the way it is met. Without questions leaning toward it, the world no longer feels like something that needs to be handled. It is not something to be approached, examined, or responded to. It is simply there, present, but no longer expectant. Much of the world's pressure comes from being addressed, from being asked to explain itself, to justify its events, to fit into meaning. When that addressing stops, the pressure eases. The world feels less like a task and more like a presence. In this state, experience unfolds without commentary. Sounds arrive and fade. Sensations shift and settle. Thoughts may still appear, but they no longer frame the world into narratives that need to be followed. Everything moves, but nothing pulls. You may notice a sense of relief here, not the relief of resolution, but the relief of not having to engage, the relief of being allowed to exist without responding. This does not mean withdrawal. You are not stepping away from the world. You are simply no longer holding it in place through thought. The world does not require that support in order to continue. As this becomes clearer, the world begins to feel more spacious, less dense with meaning, less tightly organized around you. It is not distant. It is simply unburdened. There is nothing to maintain in this way of being, no state to protect, no experience to stabilize. The world can arrive, remain, and pass without needing to be noticed in any particular way. In this quiet relationship, even the sense of you may soften slightly, not disappearing, but becoming less central, less responsible, less involved in keeping things as they are. This is not something to focus on. It does not need to be examined. It can be allowed to happen or not happen without consequence. As the world rests from being addressed, you rest as well. Not because something has been accomplished, but because nothing is being asked of you. And in this shared rest, the world and your experience of it settle into a gentle stillness, a stillness that does not need explanation, a stillness that does not ask for attention, a stillness that can carry you quietly toward sleep. When the world rests, it does not ask you to notice it. There is no signal, no clear transition. The change happens quietly, as if something has simply stopped leaning in your direction. You may begin to sense that experience no longer arrives with instructions. Sounds appear without needing to be identified. Sensations move without being traced back to a cause. Thoughts may still pass through, but they no longer frame what is happening. They do not gather the world into meaning. They simply pass. This kind of rest does not come from withdrawal. You are not stepping away from life. You are simply no longer holding it in place. The effort to keep everything oriented softens, and with it, the sense that something needs to be done in response to what appears. For much of the day, the world is held together through attention, through naming, through checking, through subtle adjustments that keep things understandable and familiar. When that holding relaxes, the world does not fall apart. It becomes lighter, less managed, less constructed. In this lighter state, time can feel different, not faster, not slower, but less structured. Moments do not push each other forward. One experience does not need to justify the next. There is room for things to arrive and leave without continuity being maintained. You may notice a gentle widening here, as if the edges of experience have softened, not disappearing but losing their sharpness. The world feels less like a collection of separate pieces and more like a single field in which things gently appear and fade. Nothing in this field requires your response. There is no need to track what is happening, no need to stay with anything in particular. Attention can rest without being directed. If the mind notices this and tries to hold on to it, that movement can be allowed to pass as well. Even the wish to remain in rest does not need to be fulfilled. Rest is already present when nothing is being maintained. As this continues, there may be a sense that you are no longer positioned at the center of experience, not pushed aside, just less emphasized. Experience happens without needing to be organized around a point of view. This can feel deeply relieving, not because something has been achieved, but because nothing is being demanded. The world is no longer asking to be interpreted. It is no longer waiting for meaning. It is simply here, resting in its own way. In this resting, there is no instruction to follow, no state to enter deliberately. You do not need to stay awake for this. You do not need to remember it. It can carry on whether you are aware of it or not. As the world rests without being held, you rest as well, not separately and not together, but as part of the same quiet easing, the same release of effort, the same permission for things to be exactly as they are. And in that permission, gently and without emphasis, sleep begins to approach, not as an event, but as a continuation of the world's rest. There is a particular kind of tiredness that comes near the end of the night, not the tiredness of the body, and not even the tiredness of the mind in the usual sense. It is the tiredness of completion, the feeling that nothing more needs to be done. This tiredness does not come from effort alone. It comes from release, from realizing that the day does not need to be closed properly, that experience does not need a final shape, that nothing needs to be finished before rest can arrive. For much of life, completion feels important. We close conversations, we finish thoughts, we make sense of what happened so it can be placed behind us. Completion gives structure to time. It makes the day feel contained. But at night, that structure can soften. The need to conclude loosens. The sense that something must be resolved before sleep becomes optional. You may notice that the mind sometimes waits for a signal, a sense that now it is safe to stop, that now everything important has been accounted for. This waiting can quietly delay rest. This section of the story is not here to give you that signal. It is here to let you notice that the signal may not be needed at all. Nothing from today needs to be sealed away. Nothing from your thoughts needs to reach an ending. Experience does not need a final sentence. It can remain open, unfinished, and still be complete in its own way. When this is seen, even briefly, a different kind of rest becomes available. A rest that does not depend on closure. A rest that does not wait for permission. In this kind of rest, the mind does not gather itself into a conclusion. It loosens its grip on sequence. One thought does not have to lead anywhere. One moment does not need to prepare the next. There is no sense of falling behind here, no sense that something is being skipped. The night does not ask you to wrap anything up. It simply continues, gently, without requiring a summary. As you listen, you may feel the urge to check whether something is complete, whether you are ready to sleep. If that urge appears, it can be allowed to pass. There is no readiness required. Rest does not arrive because everything has ended. It arrives because nothing is being held open anymore, and as that holding relaxes, the sense of needing to finish begins to fade, leaving behind a quiet openness where sleep does not need to be reached. It can simply happen. There is a quiet assumption the mind often carries, that if something is left unfinished, it might unravel, that if a thought is not completed or a feeling not fully understood, something essential will be lost. This assumption has helped the mind stay organized for a long time. But at night, it can begin to soften. When you look gently, you may notice how much effort has gone into keeping things complete. Finishing conversations internally, revisiting moments from the day to make sure they are properly placed, closing loops so they do not remain open. This effort is subtle and often invisible, but here nothing needs to be tied off. You can allow things to remain exactly where they are. Thoughts can stop mid-sentence. Feelings can remain unnamed. Memories can drift without being resolved, and nothing breaks because of it. The world does not depend on your completion of it. It does not require your understanding in order to continue. Events do not pause, waiting for you to finish thinking about them. They simply move on quietly without instruction. You may notice that when something is left unfinished, there is a brief sense of openness, a space where the mind would normally step in to conclude. If that space appears, you can let it remain open. There is no danger in it. Unfinished experience does not leak or spill. It does not accumulate in a way that needs to be managed. It settles on its own when it is not being stirred. As this becomes clearer, the mind may relax its vigilance. It no longer needs to watch over every loose end. It no longer needs to check whether something has been properly concluded. In this relaxation, experience begins to feel less dense, less packed with responsibility. The world feels capable of carrying itself without constant attention. You may sense a quiet trust forming here, not a belief and not a decision, just a recognition that things can remain incomplete and still be whole, that life does not require constant finishing in order to be stable. This trust is gentle. It does not insist on itself. It simply allows the mind to step back from its role as caretaker of meaning. As the mind steps back, even slightly, there is more room for rest, not because everything has been taken care of, but because nothing is asking to be taken care of. The night continues without needing your participation. Thoughts can come and go. Sensations can rise and fall. The world remains intact, whether or not anything is finished. And in this understanding, not an idea, but a felt sense, rest deepens. The mind no longer waits for completion. It allows itself to drift, trusting that nothing essential will be lost if it does. As the sense of needing to finish fades, something else becomes possible, a different way of being held, not by thought and not by understanding, but by the night itself. The night does not ask questions. It does not require explanations. It does not wait for anything to be resolved. It simply continues quietly, carrying everything within it. You may begin to feel that you no longer need to position yourself within experience. You do not need to know where you are in the process of resting. You do not need to notice whether sleep is approaching. The night does not measure progress. It does not keep track. In this state, attention can soften completely. It no longer needs to land anywhere. It can spread out or dissolve or rest without direction. There is nothing to follow and nothing to stay with. The sense of effort that once accompanied thinking continues to drain away. Even the effort to relax becomes unnecessary. The body settles without instruction. The mind drifts without needing permission. You may notice moments where awareness feels faint, not gone, just less defined, less centered. This is not something to correct. It is a natural part of being carried rather than carrying. Here the night does the work. It holds the space. It absorbs unfinished thoughts, loose sensations, fragments of memory. Everything that does not need to be resolved is gently received without comment. There is no need to stay present for this. You do not need to witness it clearly. The night does not require your attention in order to support you. As this continues, the boundary between doing and not doing becomes less distinct. There is no longer a clear sense of resting as an activity. There is simply resting. The world remains, but it no longer stands apart from you. It no longer presses in. It no longer waits for response. It rests, and you rest within it. Nothing needs to be protected here. Nothing needs to be remembered. Nothing needs to be carried forward. The night does not ask you to take anything with you. You can allow yourself to drift without direction, without destination. There is nowhere you need to arrive. There is nothing you need to hold on to. As the night continues, gently and without interruption, everything is carried forward at its own pace, and you are free to let go completely, trusting that the night knows how to hold you. You do not need to listen anymore. The words no longer matter. From here, the voice gently steps aside and the sound continues on its own. There is nothing to follow, nothing to understand, nothing you need to stay aware of. The rhythm you will hear now does not ask for attention. It does not guide or explain. It is simply sound, steady, and unhurried, continuing whether you are listening or not. You can allow awareness to fade completely, letting the sound remain in the background, carrying the night forward without effort.
是教的个心小也